Well, hello. This week I want to talk about some of the things that we've been talking about in my groups. These groups are put together to help people in their wellness journey, and you'll find that you get out of it what you put into it, just like anything in our lives. So it takes that energy to get where you want to go. So the question I want to ask you before we get started is, what are you putting into your journey? So in my Paleo-Veggie group, we're focused in on supporting those doing a vegan, vegetarian, or pescatarian Whole30. And I mentioned this week that people should think about reducing the number of eggs that they're eating if they're using eggs every day in their challenge, because I was seeing some of the challengers posting eggs, 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 like they weren't taking a break. Some of the research out there is showing that eating an overabundance of eggs can be just as bad to our health as smoking when it comes to our heart health as we age. Now, of course, there are other studies that have said differently, so I kind of wanted to dig a little deeper to get to the bottom of this puzzle to showcase some of this to my group. So I looked at the study that was looking into the relationship between habitual dietary intake and gut microbiota in young Japanese women. And so I think it's important to note that in 2013, a Japanese government report identified a trend of malnutrition amongst young Japanese women. And potential causes that they highlighted in this study was including this increase in those that are skipping breakfast, the rise in popularity of eating out, and the replacement of home-cooked meals with ready meals. And so they're becoming more Western in their diets. And because of that, I think there will be a rise in Western wellness issues like we're facing. Now, all of that being said, Japanese women still have the highest life expectancy of any country in the world. Now, the emphasis of Japanese cooking is to use what is fresh and in season, and they tend to eat smaller portions. Now, at least one bacteria in the Japanese gut appears to have actually altered its genetic code in order to feast on seaweed, which, that makes sense. When people in Japan began eating seaweed with their fish and rice, they also ingested some bacteria from the ocean. And as the ocean's bacteria passed through the intestines, they exchange bits of genetic code with the gut bacteria. And I think that's very cool that there is this ability for our bacteria to alter itself. And that's really what makes this research so interesting to me. But I also think that that's a big key into part of what could be happening with a lot of the gut problems that we're seeing out there. Because what is going through our intestines that could be altering our bacteria? Now, in one group of these Japanese women, they found high levels of this bacteria, which is a species in infants that either appears at approximately 10 days after birth or after a child is weaned. And so they have this superhero ability to utilize the nutrients at hand. Now, researchers have found that in the microbiota of those people dealing with obesity, that they are more heavily enriched with bacteria of a different sort and less of this. So if you have the DNA of your microbiota that you are just more at this time, I'm going to say, because we were just talking about how our bacteria can alter. So if you have this bacteria that doesn't have this superhero ability to utilize the nutrition at hand, well, that makes sense why you'd be heavier. And so the way that this bacteria works with carbohydrates and sugars is the body is more actively able to use these foods. And so it's really interesting that these studies have found that this superhero bacteria strain can directly modulate our gut function. And so there's a line of communication from the bacterium to the intestinal cell, and it can morph into a complete circle. And then it can bind directly with other bacterias and result in bacterial killing of bad bacteria that you don't want. And this bacteria increase of this bad bacteria that they found was correlated with, it's either there or not, or the good ones there, it's all correlated with iron intake. And so what they found is that this outer membrane of this bacteria is impermeable to Heme. And so I thought that was really cool and really important to share, because of the fact that research has shown that this bacteria and a probiotic strain resulted in an increase of 12-fold induction of ferritin in the colon. So based on these results, the researchers concluded that the microbiota in the intestines leads to transformation of the intestinal cells, and this encourages them to allocate iron around the body and store it. Very cool for someone like myself, who in the past, due to my genetics, has dealt with very low ferritin levels. They also found this other cluster, and part of this cluster you've heard of, C. diff. And so they say that the body does not have adequate defenses alone to fight this, that this microbe can be controlled only with the help of antibiotics like penicillin and tissue debridement, and I mean, that's like in very severe cases. But how does that make you feel? You know, my friend struggled with this recently. She got an infection after having digestive surgery. And so what they found with these two different bacterias, that the ones that were negatively correlated with intakes of cholesterol and eggs, that they were seeing in these Japanese women. These changes to not eat at home and to not eat what was in season, and to start eating more junky, cholesterol-y, and mostly saturated sort of fat, and trans fat especially, was really not good for the gut of these young Japanese women. Now, I will tell you, I've told this to my husband, and he still eats a lot of eggs. But what I welcome people to do is to go through a program of either 10 days or 30 days, or even our really strong folks that are going through 120 days without the use of eggs, just to see how your gut does without it. I feel that our guts without the meat, the dairy, the eggs, the gluten, the corn, they just have a better chance to heal than they do when we're eating these sorts of foods. Then afterwards, you can kind of figure out your nutritional truth from there. You know, one of the nutritional truths that I've been able to find out with my husband once he did that, and he did a 21-day, and then he said, I'm done, is that he really has a huge craving for proteins and amino acids. He also has some other problems. So I let him have his choice for breakfast and lunch most days. And then I choose what we eat as a family for dinner, and then for weekends for lunch and dinner. And even though I saw that his gut did best when he was completely vegan for 3 weeks, with him craving these proteins and digesting raw vegetables so poorly, it wasn't a fit. I mean, he can't even eat several vegetables like kale and arugula, which I love. And we did the digestive enzymes, didn't make a big difference. So this year I finally got him to start on his daily encapsulated whole foods, and I'm hoping that this helps his gut, because it's a lot of these nutrients that he can't just eat. So there are several items I found that he's doing well with, though, and they're not vegan, but they're less damaging. And I've recommended this to other family members that don't want to go vegan or vegetarian as well. So my husband loves bone broth. For vegans, you can do a spirulina broth, just, as well. My daughter also loves the bone broth. And so he drinks a good amount of bone broth over every week. We've been doing our own kombucha. He loves to make it himself. And so he's been drinking a lot of that. However, there can be such a thing as too much of a good thing. And so I wanted to address that because even I love kombucha. I mean, who doesn't? However, I have seen some stories about an overabundance of kombucha, just like we've seen stories out there about overabundance of certain probiotics and what this can do to some people. So with the kombucha, if you've had any symptoms of muscle aches or change in your breathing, nausea, stomach pain, it may be that you're drinking too much kombucha and you're dealing with some lactic acidosis. Now, this lactic acid, that's what makes your muscles have that burn after a good workout. But some people end up with a buildup, and that can lead to some complications. I remember that I read somewhere about this 54-year-old woman that went to the ER with asthmatic issues that turned out to just be she was drinking too much kombucha. So what about kombucha? Because there's a ton of good research studies showing the benefits of drinking it, which is why I drink it. There was a study looking into cholera that found that after 14 days, there was a membrane damage-mediated antibacterial mechanism of kombucha. And so with multi-drug resistance out there, I think that looking into things like this is a really good thing for our world. They're also looking into the antioxidant impact of ginger-based kombucha on the murine breast cancer model. And this is because these mice have high and early onset of mammary cancer compared to other mammary tumor models that these researchers might be using. And they determined that it was helpful as the consumption of this kombucha prepared from ginger. It helped with some of the minor antioxidant impacts by balancing multi-antioxidant factors in different tissues in the breast cancer models. So who knows where this will lead, but it really is pretty exciting stuff when we start researching food as pharmacy. And I'm saying pharmacy as in F-A-R-M, pharmacy, not drug pharmacy, although I do see these merging together somewhere at some point, more so in the future. Now, what I really want to make, I want to make an oak leaf kombucha, because I also saw a study recently where they were seeing oat kombucha protecting against oxidative stress and inflammatory processes. And so I can tell you that I can use all of that in my busy life. I'll take some of that. What about you? Also in June of last year, they started studying kombucha in space. So I say to you, what else is possible? This week in our group, we also talked about soy, because soy just keeps getting a bad rap. I gave soy a bad rap for many, many years, because after my allergy to soy started, when I Googled soy, everything that came up was no, no, no. That's very similar to what happened when I wanted to do vegan paleo, which is why I started Paleo Veggio, is because everything out there said, no, 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 can't, don't. And I was like, why? Why can't I? Well, what I found was that genetically modified soy always gets lumped into non-GMO soy, regardless of the differences between the two. You know, they are currently working, we were talking before about C. diff, they're currently working on a C. diff vaccine. That, of course, they want to be free of the C. diff contributing factors, so no meat or dairy. Did you know that? Meat and dairy. The researchers, the scientists that are creating vaccines say meat and dairy. that is some of the contributing factors to C. diff. They've said it. So instead, they're looking at using hydrolyzed soy proteins, especially soy peptone A, which makes me really fearful that they're going to use GM soy proteins. And then my fear is that we'll see a rise in soy allergies in those that get this vaccine. I also have to wonder what impact it's going to have on neurodisabilities, because Dr. Samsel A. Senif, which I hope I'm saying right, has predicted that by the year 2025, half of the children will be afflicted with autism from this herbicide poisoning that we're seeing. And so as well, what will it do to the digestive system of somebody already struggling? Since a recent study on this herbicide exposure in carnivorous fish revealed these really remarkable adverse effects throughout their digestive system. So the activity they found of several essential digestive enzymes were all decreased in the esophagus, stomach, and the intestine of these fish following exposure to this herbicide, which I don't want to say the name. I don't want to have, them coming after me, but you all know what I'm talking about. So non-GMO soy doesn't use this herbicide, and for a good reason. And so that's what we're getting wrong. When organic soybeans and genetically modified soybeans were tested, the organic soybeans showed the healthiest nutritional profile. They had more sugars such as glucose, fructose, sucrose, and maltose. They had significantly more total proteins, zinc, they had less fiber, actually, than conventional and GM soy. I thought that was interesting. But organic soybeans contained less total saturated fat and total omega-6 fatty acids than both conventional and GM soy. GM soy contained high residues of this herbicide and AMPA, which is really disturbing. There's a featured article on greenmedinfo.com that says that this AMPA, which is an amino acid metabolite of this herbicide, shows little or no observable toxic effects in isolation, but in combination produces a variety of adverse effects on cellular oxidative balance, including the following signs of oxidative stress, which is increased in reactive oxygen species, increases in all of these things that triggers two death proteins in human cells, inducing pathways that activate this programmed cell death, which is a clear sign of significant toxicity. Now, that's because of this amino acid metabolite mixed with this herbicide. And so all of these people that aren't eating organics, especially if you eat meat and eggs, or you're not getting on organic pasture-raised products, if you're eating those kind of things, if you are eating this stuff, that's scary. Because if you look up AMPA on the pesticide database, the entire page of information on toxicity is filled with not listed. And then there's a statement that says, sorry, no water quality standards or criteria has been established for this chemical by the U.S. or Canadian governments. However, there may be criteria established for related chemicals. So this chemical is in this spray, or sprayed oftentimes after this herbicide to help break it down. And it says on this pesticide database that there's no honeybee acute toxicity data available either, so you don't know what the standards are for our water. It hasn't been established. There's no data on the honeybees, but there's a note at the bottom that says population level effects on honeybees may occur even if a pesticide has low acute toxicity. For example, certain pesticides interfere with honeybee reproduction, ability to navigate, or temperature regulation, any of which can have an effect on long-term survival of honeybee colonies. Yet, studies have shown that honeycomb samples from Las Flores, Mexico, often contained soybean pollen. And they determined that the risk for honey production in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico is evident in the wholesale price reduction of 12% when GMO products are detected in it and the honey consignments are rejected. Because who wants organic honey that has GMO junk in it? And well, the authors of this back in 2011 and through 2013 when they did this study said that this only affects 1% of the exported honey. They're starting to recognize that this GM soy has an unacknowledged threat to the bees and beekeeping and its economics in one of the world's foremost honey producing areas. Also, if you go to the greenmedinfo.com, search for AMPA, you get a different story. They say spraying the AMPA on this resistant soybean that they've created, this genetically modified soybean, caused damage to the soybean. They showed that some investigated metabolites like AMPA and their impurities caused a slight stronger damage to human cells than this herbicide did all on its own. So how does that make you feel? So let's talk about testing to detect GM soy, because they actually did this in Turkey. They did some testing and found that out of 32 meat samples that they knew already contained GM soy in it, only 2 samples showed up positive for GM modifications. So there's no guarantee that your soy-fed meat doesn't contain GM soy. You have to know that wherever you're getting soy, you have to know that there is a very tight connection between the producer and the farmers to make sure that you're getting the very best quality product possible. So let's talk about the benefits of soy and why GMO soy cannot be supportive of our wellness. Research shows that a modified Mediterranean-style low glycemic load diet with this non-GMO soy and phytosterols had a more favorable impact than the American Heart Association Step 1 diet on cardiovascular disease risk factors. Now, although I'm not a huge fan of breaking up the soybean, it's good to know from the research I've done that most of the organic producers are not using hexane in their production any longer. They are instead using low temperature drying process, or even what they call cold water wash soy, which is so much better for us. We know that non-GMO soy is a huge protector against hormonally driven cancers. And because of the generations that have been impacted with dementia in my family, which I am really pretty sure has to do with our sticky blood platelets, which comes from our genetics, I really jumped for joy when I read the story that said that total soybean and soy isoflavone intake might decrease the risk of cognitive impairment in elderly Japanese women. Now, I may not be Japanese, although I did my DNA and I do have some Asian DNA. So maybe it will help with reducing any decline that I might have ahead of me. I also just learned that soy products protect against the estrogen mimicker BPA, where a Harvard study found that a soy-rich diet could protect against reproductive health problems associated with BPA exposure. But what they're saying is that although it's great for girls, it's not great for infants. And while they've said that it helps with glycemic control in men with type 2 diabetes, they're also now saying it decreases prostate cancer risk. So while there's a lot of information out there saying that soy isn't great for men, I'm seeing that the new research out there seems to be telling another story. Again, you have to find your own personal nutritional truth. And that's what I feel like I've done and why I've changed the way that I look at soy. The last 2 weeks, I even had some tempeh. Yay me. So on another personal note, I bought this Dr. Tung's Ionic toothbrush this last week. I'm researching, some of these studies that came out of Japan, and this is a pretty popular toothbrush over in Japan. And I was hearing really great things about how it positively removes plaque. So I look at their website, and their mission was based on the concept of total health. And I'm like, yay! I'm all about that because I work on a holism approach to wellness with my clients as well. And the Dr. Tung's approach emphasizes the role of oral health and overall health. I believe that there's so much that oral health plays a role in as far as our overall wellness. So I focused on that a little bit in the W30 group. And so that's why I wanted to try something new. So I'd seen that the plastic that they're using is made with EcoPure, which allows the microbes in an active microbial environment to colonize on the plastic and digest the polymer. And I also saw that they're a cruelty-free company, no child labor, no discrimination, no animal testing, which is very important. They're also all about biodegradable and recycling. So I thought, why not? I also went, of course, and looked at EcoPure because I'm like, well, what is this EcoPure? This is strange. And I found it really interesting that their website says there are approximately 250 million tons of trash produced in the United States annually. As a result, landfills are filling up faster and faster since many materials degrade at an extremely slow pace. In response to this problem, Biotech Environmental developed EcoPure, an organic additive designed to enhance the speed of plastic decomposition in landfills, which I think is pretty cool because I have seen that there's been less purchasing of our plastic recyclables over this last year. I also know from visiting our local recycling facility that there are some of the plastics they don't even take that just go back to the landfill. So I thought that was very cool. And also, this toothbrush has no EMFs. And I will say it does feel like it's removing 48% more plaque than my expensive toothbrush. However, for me, my daughter tried it because it came with 2 heads. She was fine with it. For me, it hurt. I had read some reviews where people said, don't buy this. It's got these hard, prickly ends that just feel so horrible. And I felt the toothbrush when it came and I thought, there's nothing hard on this. These people are crazy. However, there is something with me, the way it reacts. My gums are very red and in pain when I finish brushing. So what I've been doing is I'm soothing them. So I'm taking my regular toothbrush from Whole Foods and I'm adding a drop of tea tree oil and brushing that on my teeth and gums. I also am, even though I am loving it, I do feel like it's doing its job. But I really, really love the Dr. Tung's floss. I think it's the best floss, better than any other floss I've ever used in the past. So that I would recommend. But I just want to say, if you try the Dr. Tung's toothbrush, you may or may not have my experience. I also got a nudge to use the Living Libations Frankincense Fresh Toothpaste, which I love frankincense, favorite oil. I love that it was an alkalizing paste made with organic virgin coconut oil, sodium bicarbonate, saponified olive oil, frankincense, myrrh, peppermint, thyme, linalool, because of course they're being honest about what they're using. They're not saying lavender, tea tree, and MSM. So researchers are seeing that MSM can be pretty helpful for dental health, and I didn't know that. And I know I don't get enough sulfur in my life, which I'm trying to work on. But hey, if it reduces inflammation and gingivitis and helps remove plaque, I thought it sounded like a nice combination to go with the new toothbrush. So all of this got me thinking more about do-it-yourself, especially since, as a certified aromatherapist, I could probably make this toothpaste for much less than I bought it for, although it was nice to not have to go through that process. But like I had said, I had tried some tempeh over the last 2 weeks, which is the first time in over a year since I was down in Newport Beach and had some hemp tempeh. And I really think that I might want to make some, because we've made sourdough bread before, although that was a long time before I went paleo. I might try to do some sort of GF one someday. We make a lot of kombucha, like I said, and we also make our own sauerkraut. So why not tempeh? So that's something I'll keep you updated on in the future. And I'm going to ask you if you have any really successful tempeh recipes, especially if you've made your own, like hemp tempeh. If you'll head over to the Paleo Veggio Facebook group and share it with me, I would really, really be grateful. Finally, this weekend is the last weekend of the Broken Brain documentary being free. And they were talking on one of the videos about GABA connections to anxiety. And I have that one running rampant in my DNA and my kids. I just have to say thank you, epigenetics, right? Anyone else have a little of that? There are epigenetic markers, including histone methylation, acetylation, gene methylation, and chromatin loop formations that regulate various GABA genes. And so these patterns of epigenetic modifications can serve as epigenetic markers to represent gene activity and expression as well as the chromatin state. So let me layman this for you. Chromatin is a complex of macromolecules found in cells, consisting of DNA, protein, and RNA. It allows our bodies to pack DNA more condensed. It reinforces our DNA molecules to allow mitosis, which is that part of the cell cycle where division of the cell happens. It works to prevent damage to our DNA and control gene expression and DNA replication. The primary protein is histone. And so I love how AGS Health explained it, so I'm going to kind of share their sort of storyline behind this. So they said that histone methylation requires the addition of a methyl group. If you follow MTHFR, you know what a methyl group is. And so the addition of the methyl group getting added to the protein called a histone. Now, a histone is a protein that DNA wraps itself around, kind of like tape in those old music cassettes, where the film is constantly being wound and unwound depending on what song you want to hear. So similarly, DNA is being exposed and covered depending on what gene you want expressed. The location of the methylation on histone can either expose or hide away genes by controlling this unwinding process. So in MTHFR, the histone methylation patterns are thought to play a role in some of the negative side effects that can happen with these folate receptors. 5-MTHF levels can alter the expression of DNA MTHFR genes thanks to these DNA methylation and histone modification, and at the same time that folate levels are being influenced by the MTHFR nutrigenics. So it's a combination of the nutrigenics and this DNA methylation and histone modification that is causing what we're seeing if you have MTHFR. So back to the GABA, which is in part of this, is what research is showing is that regulation of chromatin structure through a sort of modification of histones is emerging as a really important mechanism to translate a variety of environmental stimuli, including drugs of abuse, into specific changes in gene expression. So specifically, withdrawal from chronic exposure to some drugs and alcohol increased ADAC activity, which is this sort of balanced epigenetics response, and reduced histone acetylation in the amygdala. And when this increased ADAC activity was blocked with an inhibitor in tests, the mice failed to develop withdrawal-induced anxiety. We know that stress evokes activation of GABA receptors. Decreased GABA leads to an increase in histone H3, which is one of the 5 main histone proteins, and that makes memories stronger, which kind of makes a lot of sense if you're somebody that has anxiety, that when you have this increase and you make this memory stronger, why you would react again and again to the same sort of thing. And so studies of adults suffering from anxiety disorders have shown that they also possess enlarged, highly connected amygdalae. Now, the olfactory system is the only sensory system that involves the amygdala, the limbic system, in its primary processing pathway. I think that's very important to remember. MTHFR gene mutations have a really strong link to anxiety disorders, including depression, anxiety, panic attacks. I had major panic attacks, especially when I was in my late teens. I've seen a lot of the anxiety, personally, my daughter, just including today at the store, where she started having an anxiety attack in the store and just would not let go of the shopping cart and was like controlling it and not getting out of people's way. And I've seen some of this in my mother-in-law. So if this MTHFR mutation that is associated with so many things, including like an increased risk in colorectal cancer, and if an adequate folate intake and avoiding alcohol can be a factor in preventing it and other symptoms from happening, well, what else is available for us to bridge these epigenetic gaps and help keep some of these genes from being turned on in the first place? So like I was just talking about with the amygdala, complementary and alternative medicine seems to be highlighted so much more these days in working with the key gaps in so many areas that we just don't know enough about. So using things like meditation, dietary therapy, relaxation, hypnotherapy, aromatherapy, and nutrient-dense supplementation is something I'm seeing more and more of. And I've seen research showing that aromatherapy reduced anxiety, increased sleep, and even stabilized the blood pressure of patients undergoing cardiac stent insertion. I also saw another study that was showing that aromatherapy and bright light treatment seems to be safe and effective and may have an important role in managing behavioral problems in people with dementia. So although science is struggling to keep up, in my family, we try to use as much nature as we can to help our bodies sort through some of this genetic soup. I am sure that you understand. Monday, we start our next 10-day transformational group, as well as a lot of people are starting vegan W30s on Monday. And there are some of our folks that are doing longer transformations that are going to be people that can help mentor you through, that are really working hard towards hitting their next month's goals. You know, when we can't nail down completely what is causing our problems, I feel like it's great to move in and take an opportunity to just reduce the toxins, increase the hydration, no gluten, no dairy, no alcohol, no sugar, and breathe and move. That's so important. And flood our bodies with plants just to see what it does. It's nature, it's natural, and I find that oftentimes it works. If you want to connect or find out more, just hit up the blog at www.paleovegio.com or follow along on the Facebook page, PaleoVegio, or on Instagram, we are now at PaleoVegio. This is Barbara Christensen, and I wish you a wonderful week full of awareness and good food. I will see you next time.